Mr. President, during this meeting, we are covering the time period for 2025. I would like to propose a moderated discussion format. I propose to start with Ms. Markarova.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you to share with us a little bit about such an important issue of confiscation of Russian sovereign assets so that we can better coordinate our actions here. Yesterday we were in Zaporizhzhia and, perhaps, visits to such places best show, firstly, the need, and secondly, what exactly Russia has to pay for it. And taking into account the fact that, let's say diplomatically, the country in which I work now and all who will continue now, occupies such a very difficult position, and we will need money, this looks like one of the biggest priorities for obtaining resources in order to buy weapons, to rebuild everything. Therefore, a large group works here. Can you share where we need to coordinate efforts during recent meetings in Europe to organize actions and confiscate money for 2026, either collectively in the G7 or separately, with or without America, as this is a resource for weapons and air defense? Thanks.
This is probably not a question, but more of a commentary on what is happening. The United States is the main decision maker, but the main assets are not there. I would say so. Or, if we look at the value of those assets that are in the United States, we realize that there are other countries that are carriers of all these different assets, totally different assets in different values. But why a decision maker? Because we know with you, Mrs. Oksana, and with other ambassadors who are representatives of the G7 countries, everything that is decided at the level of the leaders of the seven, then all this goes down and then has a real tangible effect. In this way, we were able to get, for example, tens of billions after the G7 decision in Italy and a heads up in the United States of America and other countries. Because there was a solution and then the tools were found. I would like to remind you of the reason for these compensations. We received this money, which greatly helped us and, first of all, the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine to get through the year. That is, I think it is necessary to concentrate on political decisions and not on some small assets. Why? Because small assets or large assets, it all depends on the political decision. If there is a political decision by the G7, then there will be a decision later on all the others. With all due respect to all countries of Europe, the European Union, if there is a decision of the seven, everything will be different. This is a fact. There will also be decisions on the platform of the seven, the presidents of the European Union, the European Commission, first of all, always present, the International Monetary Fund, other financial institutions that certainly help in this. Therefore, it is the big seven political decisions. As for the European Union, I jumped a little, it depends on the European Union. Again, the decision is at the European level. Therefore, we, in principle, understand that we need to work with the seven. And I think then there will be a solution.
Mr. President, you were right about how Ukraine should become an exporter of security. And this will certainly apply to Africa as well. But we must also become an exporter of justice. And this is also about the export of dignity. By the way, the African continent has perhaps the greatest experience in holding hybrid international tribunals. And we need to involve African countries, their experts, and lawyers in the work on our tribunal on the crimes of aggression against Russia against Ukraine. And this will probably serve our interests and, in addition, strengthen the so-called informational and psychological component in Africa. And it was such a comment, and the question will be so. Do you think that Africa's so-called peacekeeping potential is exhausted?
Is it already exhausted?
Yes. I mean the African Tumber Initiative, with which African leaders came to us. And if not, what are the expectations of leading African countries in this context? Thank you.
Thank you. Now one of the diplomats awarded today, Mr. Kislitsa, he worked for a very long time and effectively at the UN General Assembly. And he knows what it is like when you need a political majority that supports your resolutions on the grounds of the UN General Assembly. On the one hand, this is just such political support, and on the other hand, it then expands into other steps, goes as a signal to the society of these countries. And what is on the scoreboard is the first political victory, as they say. And when you didn't have African countries with you, on your side, and then, through different jobs, you have these countries that support you. This suggests that this is the result of this work and these are important decisions. For the future, that you will have everything related to the abduction of Ukrainian children. You will still have something related to the tribunal. There will be crime, there will be aggression. And all this at some point will be necessarily either accepted by the international community or most countries of the world, or not. And this is a lot of political pressure on Russia to isolate it and end the war. So here the African context is very important for us. We need to talk even more with Africa, we need to have a dialogue with Africa. We are not talking about words, we need to have an economic dialogue so that it is a big bilateral victory with each of these countries, with each that are ready. The security segment will also be important. Of course, after the end of the war, I really want Ukrainian defense to work for Africa. And thus, due to competition and other pressure, Russian influence could be replaced. We don't want to be influenced. We want to be partners. We do not want to elect the leaders of Africa, as Russia does through weapons. We want to be partners with them, we want them to choose the economy and security. This is what we can give Africa, so we need to work with them. As for the negotiation platform, all this that I said has an impact on the negotiation process. Although it seems to me that African leaders, most of the influential large countries in Africa, they certainly no longer trust Putin. And this is also thanks to our meetings and concrete results. The president of South Africa specifically says that he does not see that Putin wants to end the war. Honestly, this is a change in the whole character over a large number of years. We have a good relationship with him. And what to work on? It seems to me that everything is very simple for you. It is very simple, but also very difficult. Simple, because there is one question. It is difficult because it is not easy to solve. You have the big 20. We need to find a place for Ukraine. Such a task. Who is our ambassador to Egypt now? I wish you health. We recently had a conversation with the president of Egypt. After a 2-year pause. There is a long pause, although the trade turnover may be very large in Egypt and me. We talked with him. An important economic impact for strengthening bilateral relations is the construction of a grain hub. That's what we call it. Working title. He is very positive. That is, we have a conversation, there is a dialogue, he really wants it and really expects that we will have government meetings, etc. That is why it seems to me that this is one of the reasons for our presence, not the reason, but what can affect our relations with the African continent is the construction of such hubs. And when not only we want to build something somewhere, when we have a mutual interest. For example, like us, Ukraine and Egypt.
We see that after the NATO Hague summit, a new dynamic is being created along NATO lines and in the context of those decisions that were made regarding the new defense target of 5% and opportunities for Ukraine not only for our security, strengthening, but also for defense production, financing. We also see new trends from Washington, that NATO is actually appointed as the coordinator of military supplies, which was difficult to imagine under the previous administration. How would you recommend here to act in these new conditions, in this new dynamic? And for me in Brussels, and for the ambassadors in NATO member countries who are also here, I think it is also important for them to understand how to make the most of this dynamic. Should we focus now exclusively on practical results, which relate to joint ventures, financing of our defense industry, activation of our newly created infrastructure with NATO, NSATO, JTEC, regional associations? That is, in fact, entering NATO through some different side doors, or removing all some reservations, of course, is delicate jewelry, given the sensitivity of this issue in the context of Washington's peacekeeping efforts that Ukraine's membership in NATO is actually able to accelerate the end of the war, and not prolong it. And that this is not Putin's goal. Renouncing Ukraine's membership in NATO is not Putin's goal in the war, it is really just a tool to achieve this goal, which is the destruction of Ukraine and the destruction of us as a nation. That is, if perhaps your vision of how to make the most of this new dynamic, then I would be very grateful for it. And special thanks for the opportunity to join the diplomatic team. It is a great honor for me and I will work for the result as much as possible.
We must take advantage of the fact that the United States of America and key leaders of Europe are not against the strengthening of Ukraine in this 5%. I think it's not a fact that this will happen. And this is a fact that it is. You know that there are programs when the EU has opened up the possibility of 150 billion, the countries of the Union can take this money. But they take them as obligations and then transfer them to Ukraine. They talk about the readiness of many countries, already 10 countries, to take this money, but we do not see the result that they took it and handed it over to us. I believe that this is a question for both NATO and the EU. We really need this. When? Now we need it. This is a priority. Unfortunately, we will not join NATO now. The war and other reasons that you talked about can be discussed now, or we can choose what we can get from this NATO summit in The Hague. We can put pressure and take exactly the money we need for ourselves. I would focus on that. And the second point, which is very important, and we began to talk about it. NATO can do it. What exactly? Additional funding for our army. It is additional funding for the military. It is the motivation of the military. Of course, everyone understands that our soldiers began to defend and continue to defend their country not for the sake of money. But we know and feel that we need additional financial motivation for the Ukrainian army. I would focus on two issues. Money for drones, money for the military.